Pam Nowak, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
We have a lot to catch up with you about. You are heavily involved in coordinating, kind of shepherding some of the pieces and articles that are coming in about Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers' 40th anniversary, and we want to get to some of that, and also an article you recently wrote contributing to that growing pile of information and memories and reminiscences. But first, we just want to check in. I want to just check in with you. What's new in the world of Pam Nowak books? It seems like every time I turn around, there's some award or some cool thing coming your way. It seems like you've had a pretty good stretch here.
Yeah, cool things are good and awards are absolutely wonderful. So right now I am waiting to hear on Necessary Deceptions. It is currently a finalist for the Laramie Award. Never Let Go won that award last year. So I am sitting here waiting until the end of April when I hear on this one, and hoping for good things. Headed back to Minnesota this summer for another book tour, visiting several libraries there, and then on to the Western Writers of America. I'm doing 2 workshops at their conference.
You know, one thing that occurs to me about Never Let Go and just your books in general, some people these days, it seems like, think, you put out a book and it's got a fairly short shelf life or life. You really demonstrate that books have a long life, that it's really what you put into it. And yeah, not every day you might not sell as many copies as the day before, but there is a any book, if I pick up a book tomorrow, it's new to me. It doesn't matter when it was published.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that is staying in touch with your readership or potential readership, and making sure that you're just engaging all the time, so that if they've read your book, they're inclined, because they enjoy talking with you, to recommend your book to someone else. It's not just something that they put on their nightstand and forgot about. They actually are interacting with me as a person, which makes them more likely to share news. And as far as the library tours, this time around, I'll be doing some of the tours on Necessary Deceptions, but some of them will be on Never Let Go. It depends on what the individual library's readership most prefers.
Right. For those who don't know, why don't you tell us, just to give us a couple of paragraphs on Necessary Deceptions?
Well, Necessary Deceptions tackles the 2 women that were married to Wyatt Earp the longest. Both Josie and Maddie, deception played a huge role in their lives. And we know about them based on the movies we've seen on television and in the theater, but those glimpses are not at all what these women were about. There is so much more to them. And the small roles that they had in movies like Tombstone and Wyatt Earp, they aren't portrayed accurately. Basically, Josie deceived everyone from the moment she was a child to all through her life, and manipulating the story of Wyatt Earp and creating the legend. She went to great lengths to hide all the unsavory things about herself and about Wyatt, and there were a lot of them. And then Maddie, I think, deceived herself about how Wyatt felt about her, and she was shuttled off into the background, and no one knew about her until probably the 1970s. She had been that covered up by Josie and the television legend of Wyatt Earp.
Wow. When did that book come out?
That came out the beginning of oh my goodness, what are we, 23, 22.
Okay. So it's been out for a little over a year then, 15
Yep.
months or so.
Yeah, I think
that's great.
February of 22 was
Yeah.
released.
Yeah. And what has been some of the reader reaction to all the work you put into that one?
Generally pretty good. I have a lot of people talking about the good research and the portrayal of these women as real women, as opposed to the part of the legend that, and I have some people saying, gosh, I had no idea their lives were that tough. And then the odd comments about, gee, I didn't know Wyatt was that much of a troublemaker and not the good guy that he's portrayed as.
Yeah. Wow. Did that project turn out, just when you think back to when you started work on that project and where it ended up, can you talk a little bit about how much you learned along the way and how it changed as you worked on it?
I think before I began that, I had done a lot of research, and I'd read a number of nonfiction books and gotten very intrigued by these women. So in the research phase, I learned a lot, but what I discovered was just how hard it was to put things together from the historical record and the lies that Josie left in her interviews and her biography, and trying to piece all the overlapping facts and put them together and try to find where was the truth in that.
So you were dealing with an unreliable narrator who left behind too many false leads in the public record.
There were a lot of false leads, and there were certain parts of the historical record that you could take some of the things she mentioned and say, that wasn't 1880, it was 1878, because this newspaper has an account that Mrs. Markham's theater troupe came through the area. So you could look for those germs of truth and say, well, here's her story's off by 2 or 3 years. And I think that's because she didn't want people to know how young she was when she left.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, this is going to be an attempt at a segue, but it's going to be to use the obviously rich and involved story and work that you put into Necessary Deceptions, and just ask you to think back. If can you imagine, as you started to get engaged with Rocky Mountain fiction writers way back then, if you would have been able to tackle a project like that and pull it off and see it to publication when you first started coming around to RMFW?
No, not at all. The research, the raw research I would have been able to do, because that's what I went to school for. I was a historian, and the research part of it I could do, but crafting a story out of that research, I had put together a manuscript in 6 weeks because I wanted to be a writer. And then I joined Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers and learned how badly I wrote, because it's not the same thing as writing a research paper. And the many, many layers that I had to learn to peel off and escalate up the ladder as I joined critique group and got feedback from those with the experience. And no, I could not have done this at all without Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers.
Yeah. Well, the article you wrote is called RMFW's Second Decade. Take us back. What year was this? What were your personal goals when you first started engaging with RMFW? And give us a picture of what your life and world looked like. Did you think you'd become a full-time fiction writer like a lot of us?
So my first exposure to Rocky Mountain fiction writers was late 1993, and I had just finished that manuscript. And we moved from Rollins, Wyoming to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I went to a program that Mary Gilgannon was giving at the local library. And Mary had just signed a contract and was working toward publication. And she talked about Rocky Mountain fiction writers. And I thought, that's what I need. So I joined a few months later. At first was not too involved. And then I went to one of the monthly workshops and met Sharon Minery there. Sharon was at the coffee table.
Wait a minute. So you were in Wyoming. Was this in Denver? When did you come down to a
I went
meeting?
to Fort Collins. They had
Okay.
program in Fort Collins, and Sharon was there, and she just engaged me and told me all about it and invited me to start coming to her critique group. She lived in Brighton at the time. So once a month, I drove down to Brighton for critique group, and Liz Rotifer, who lived in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, went with me. And the two of us rode down there, went to critique group, and then came back, and every single month for critique group for as long as Sharon had, as long as Sharon lived in Brighton. And then when she moved to Texas, yeah, that disappeared for us.
Right. And Sharon, who lives now about 40 miles from me in Southwest Colorado here, she lives up by Lemon Reservoir, and I live west of Durango in Mancos, but she was recently part of this podcast series as well. And yes, she's been around since the earliest days of RMFW. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
she has been one of my mentors, and Sharon and I still critique via email.
That's great. That's fantastic. That's 30 years of critiquing.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Wow, what a deal. That's awesome. So that's a lot of commitment on your part to make that trip. For those who don't know, I mean, that's how long a drive every month?
An hour and a half.
Yeah. And driving back late at night then in the evenings?
Around 5 o'clock.
Yeah. But obviously worth it. You got a lot out of it.
Absolutely. You know, that critique group, almost every member of that group went from unpublished to published during our time in the group.
Wow. Isn't that something? That's great. And talk a little bit about going to your first conference that you mentioned in there about just feeling, and I remember the same feeling of just like you want to just stick to the walls and like, do I belong here? And how do I really engage? It's a really interesting, I mean, I think we all feel it, right?
Well, I think we all do, but you did not know me at that time. And
no.
I was very good at presenting in front of people. I was great in my role as director of the homeless shelter. I was great in my role as community theater director. I could assume a role and talk to people, but to socialize in a room where somebody might see the real me as opposed to whatever role I was in, I could not do that. I was so shy. So that conference hit me. Not only did I only know two people, I knew Liz Rotifer and one other person from Cheyenne, and Sharon just a little bit. I just was so uncomfortable talking to people in the first place. And you'd never know that talking to me now.
Yeah.
Because I discovered who I was in the process of growing into a writer. And I discovered that, hey, people like me, you know, like this. You really, really like me.
Yeah.
So, you know, I found my place with Rocky Mountain fiction writers. So it gave me not only the writing and the lessons in craft, but it gave me the self-actualization.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to get involved with RMFW leadership And how long was it until, I mean, and then you ran the conference itself for how many years? Four,
Oh my
four or
goodness.
five?
I think I chaired five, three of them alone, two of them with Susie Brooks, and probably about five others where I served in three chair capacities to Susie when she was doing conference.
Wow.
So I did mostly critique sessions and either participating in or judging contests, and then newsletter articles for a long time. And when I moved to Denver in 2008, Scott Brendel tagged me to do the critique roundtables at conference, which had been his job, and then he became president. So he tagged me for that. I took that on. I had volunteered as an intake coordinator the year before. And then Scott tagged me to become conference chair after that. So around 2008 is when I started becoming heavily involved.
Yeah. And was that daunting to you at the time?
It was good for me. I had retired from the day job, so it allowed me to keep those skills alive. And I was also recently widowed, so it was really something to focus on and a good place for me to be at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you did a great job, and you're just the people who were at those conferences, and I have to say this for all the conference chairs, but I mean, people that don't realize there's so many moving parts in a 3-day, 4-day weekend.
Full-time job. It really is.
Yeah. And the amount, I mean, you start planning the next one almost the day after the last one finishes, like, you know, you can't waste a minute to get ready for the next year. There's so much work that goes into it.
Yeah, it's not something you can do in a few weeks. It stretches the whole timeline, and hotel contracts have to be signed 18 months to 36 months in advance.
Yeah. Wow. And one thing you talk about in the article a lot, and which is, I think, fairly obvious to anybody who's been around writing for 3 decades or so, as you have been, is just how much your average everyday writer needs to know about things other than writing. It used to be you kind of focus on writing, you get the basics down about how to query and you obviously type up a letter and put it in an envelope and put in a self-addressed stamped envelope and mail it off to an agent and hope for the best. And you do that for weeks and weeks and weeks, hoping to get a bite. But now a writer needs to know across the waterfront, marketing and editing and cover design in some cases. So talk a little bit about that transformation, what it's meant for RMFW.
I think it might be something that is difficult to grasp for those who came on the writing scene after we moved into the electronic age, because that preparing things by typewriter or word processor, or even our earliest of personal computers, it took a long time. You had to be good enough at what you were doing in order to put in the time to do all that typing and to send off those pages and wait. And now it's so much easier in terms of querying and submission, because you prepare it, you edit online, you don't have to type it over and over and over again. And the query submission process is easier and quicker. And there's no stigma anymore about self-pubbing, which there was when I was coming up. I mean, you just did not do that. That was only the people who were really, really vain And if you did a self-pub back in the 1990s, you kind of ruined your reputation with
Yeah.
editors and agents, and you couldn't get your foot in the door because they considered themselves that gatekeeper, and you were going around them.
Right. Right.
And it's a whole different environment now.
Yeah, I
And
think I think that if you went self-publishing then in the 90s, it was like, I'm in too much of a hurry. I'm in too much of a rush. I need to get this out. My readers need this, and I'm not willing to go through a slow, thoughtful process that an agent and then a publisher might put me through.
And today we're also looking at, like you said, having to learn all the other things. I didn't know how to market. I had to learn to put together a marketing plan. I had to learn social media, and I still, beyond Facebook, I'm not comfortable with social media. And I resisted a lot to begin with, saying that's not what I want to do with my time. And I've adapted, and I've learned to have the interaction with readers, but I know I don't do some of the social media interaction the way that I should be if I wanted to sell a lot of my own self-published books. That's not a place where I am yet.
Well, I've found that in marketing, you have to do stuff that's comfortable for you. And if you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. I mean, I would not be comfortable walking up to every house in Memphis, knocking on the door and saying, buy my book. And if you're not comfortable on social media, you shouldn't do it. I mean, even though maybe you feel the pressure to do so, it's not you. But I don't know. I want to go back to the stigma. I think it's really interesting. The stigma wasn't like it went away overnight at all. It took a long time. I would say maybe 6, 8, 10 years, really. And
possibly even 20.
Yeah. What do you think? First of all, has the stigma really completely gone away? Probably not. In the minds of really the true old guard.
Yeah, in terms of those older authors who put in all the work of learning their craft and then all the shipping of things through the gatekeeping process, I think among some there was this thing of, if you're self-publishing, you're skipping some of that, and are your books as good? And some of the self-published books that are out there, a great number of them are excellent books.
Yeah,
but
for
there
sure.
are still some that rush to publishing, and you can see it when you order a book or download the first few chapters that the craft isn't there.
Yeah.
And those are all things that are going to come into play.
Yeah. For a while, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers split in two, in a way, with those two camps. And now it's merged back together as one when there was the independent published authors liaison and the published authors liaison. And it's kind of come back together. And you make the point that RMFW is a collective, which I think is a really great term to use, because it's an ongoing, ever-changing organization that it reflects the current status any given year of what's happening. Right. And it is a flexible, malleable entity. I assume you're happy to see it all back together under one roof, basically.
Yeah, when I was president was when we were first defining how to create the Independent Writer of the Year Award. And that was part of my term of shaping that. And it was always kind of the discussion in that process that one day the two awards would merge together, but that nobody was quite ready for that yet. And the only way to get there was to create a separate award so that we could get more comfortable with one another and with our differences and with our commonalities, so that
Yeah.
we could bring this together finally in the end. And it followed just about the time frame that we thought it was. We thought 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yep. It's really interesting. I mean, it would be maybe in my mind a perfect world if all I ever had to do was think about the actual story I'm trying to write at any one given time. Wouldn't that be a luxury to only bear down on the words and how they come together and create a story? On the other hand, it is kind of cool to know some of those skills and to learn some of those skills, and actually to appreciate editing. One thing I really have come to appreciate, I've always liked editors. I was a reporter for 20 years and appreciate what editors see that you cannot see as a writer.
Yeah, you miss stuff.
You're
too involved in it.
The brain is really funny like that, isn't it? It just doesn't, it refuses to come at it clean and cold, which is somehow, very few people can put aside what they wrote and come at what they wrote as an editor. It's one in a million.
We're emotionally invested in our writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when there's the emotion in there, it's awful hard to let go of a sentence that you really, really like.
Yeah.
But which may not be the best sentence.
Yeah. And to get that kind of input, and also just to catch stuff, inconsistencies and things you won't see, to have a character's hair color different in one chapter than the next, or just little stuff that
Somebody's age is off or whatever. And the typos.
Yeah.
Good heavens. I found a typo in every book that I've had published, and that's been through my critique groups, plural.
Yeah.
It's been through my beta readers, plural. It's been through my editing process. It's been through my publisher's editing process. And still, there they are.
It is incredible. And it's true. I think every writer would say the same thing. Well, I mean, looking back, you must be awfully proud of being part of having sort of steered the ship, been part of the leadership, seen it come together. Really think, when you think back about all the changes RMFW has taken on over the years, and moved through some issues, some challenging issues from time to time, but emerged on the other side still clicking along. It's a healthy organization, lots of new members coming every year to conference, things like that. You must feel pretty good.
Yeah, I feel very proud of the role that I played in it, but I also get a really warm feeling about all the other really capable, talented people that I've met. And you look back at all the challenges over a 40-year period. How many organizations survived 40 years? And we had a bunch of them. Initially, we were a romance writers group, and we made a shift to opening that to other genres. That was rocky, really rocky.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we had an influx of new members, and the organization tripled almost overnight. And we had to deal with that. And then we had self-publishing come on the scene, and we had to adapt to that. And there were changes moving the newsletter from print to online, and learning to transition our members to the new technology. And then the recognition of independent authors as writers of the year. All of those were significant challenges for us, because we had to make a lot of adjustments in terms of what was going on and our reactions to it. and our acceptance of new ideas.
Yeah. And that's been the key to RMFW, I think, is there is an opportunity, and I would say it's a very open, kind of flat organization. You basically, it's, you're on the board or you're not. If you want to get involved, and I've seen that board up to 20 some people
Yeah.
helping organize various areas, and even, various areas can take multiple people who want to be on the board and support what's going on. But if you want to have a voice in RMFW, you can have a voice in RMFW. That's my point. And as a result, the organization keeps shifting. It's like one of those bird flocks in the sky that the wind is blowing around, and it's not set in stone.
Yeah, we are constantly changing, and as the leadership changes, the ideas change and the focus may change, but we're all finding a way to craft what we need from the group, and for it to provide multiple things to multiple different groups.
Yep. I think it's very encouraging. I think it's I personally believe that there's more and more writers all the time, partly because independent publishing makes it so possible to learn how to write. And I think writing is such a tremendous thing to learn how to do. And it's fairly cheap. I mean, you need a typewriter or a computer, or maybe a pen and a pencil, or a notebook. It's a fairly straightforward thing to do, and it's so personal. Nobody can write like you can, and there are some craft elements it's good to have down, so that we have some common expectations around grammar and just how to build a novel or a short story, whatever it might be. But it's such a wonderful thing to be able to learn how to do. And RMFW is just sitting there as probably one of the strongest writing organizations around, and I think a national model in a lot of ways. I know there are lots of states out there that would wish they had some sort of organization as strong as RMFW, and Colorado's lucky because there are multiples. There's Northern Colorado Writers, there's Pikes Peak, there's Rocky Mountain Mystery Writers, on and on.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. How does it feel when you've been down in Albuquerque now for how long?
I moved in 2020.
Okay, mid pandemic, basically, or
yeah, early pandemic.
Okay, wow. And do you still feel connected to RMFW?
I still feel the connection, although it's not as immediate.
Yeah.
There's a strong connection, but yet when I went to conference, there were so many new faces because I hadn't been at events. So especially not seeing anybody during the pandemic years, it was like, whoa, there are all kinds of people here that I don't know. And leadership has changed significantly. There are a lot of people in leadership roles that I didn't know in person before I moved away.
Yep. That's the nature of the RMFW beast. It keeps getting
keeps changing.
Yep. Very good. Well, Pam, thanks so much. Thanks. I guess my final question before I get to the reader, to the book or writer recommendation, what has it meant for you to be the person sort of organizing all these articles that you've asked folks to write about the history of the organization? Is it important to you to be able to be in that sort of editor role in this stage of the memories?
I think what's important to me, most important, is that we're assembling these memories together. For years we had boxes of historical material that went from place to place, and over the course of years, a lot of it ended up getting lost or damaged, or we had always had a goal of trying to digitize it, and we never seemed to have gotten there. And we have some members who are in their 80s, those original founding or early members, and remembering is difficult for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had a lot of emails back and forth, phone calls, trying to reignite those memories and pull them out so that we could share with those who weren't around what
Yeah.
had occurred. And I had heard some of that because I knew some of these people, but some of it I never did, because goodness, by the time I got active, some of those early members were already retiring or moving away.
Yeah.
So it's good to pull all that and create something that's going to be a permanent memory. You know, Susie's taking all of these articles and they will all go into a book format. And that book will be available at conference.
That's amazing. That is really cool. Yeah. Excellent. Well, as always, I'd like to just get a recommendation for a book or a writer you'd like to shine a spotlight on as we wrap up here. So now's your chance.
I have not been actively reading lately. My life has just been overwhelming, but I have discovered a new author, Alina Rubin, A-L-I-N-A, Rubin, R-U-B-I-N. She writes historical fiction, and I have 2 of her books on my nightstand that I am very much looking forward to. A Girl with a Knife and No Job for a Woman, about a sailor and a doctor.
There you go. Very good. We will look for that and check it out. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And Pam, thanks for your time today. Thanks for jumping on the podcast. And will we see you at Colorado Gold this coming year?
I will be at Colorado Gold, and look very much forward to seeing everybody and getting caught up.
Yeah. Have you put in some conference proposal ideas?
I have not. It's on the back burner, and I sense I'm coming up on deadline, so I better get moving.
I think you have exactly, we're talking on Wednesday. I think you've got about a day and a half until
basically it's pulling my workshops out of my files and just filling out the form. So I tend to leave it till the last minute.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Very good. Well, we'll see you soon, Pam. You take care.
All right, Mark. Thank you.